Brian Hamilton, thank you so much for having me back in your podcast loop. I have loved being interviewed by you. I think it was 7 times, if I'm not mistaken. So here we are back together. I want to share with you a really powerful opportunity to boost resiliency in organizations. And that is the Nurses Week Resiliency Reboot. Now, I know that you're all security experts, so you may be thinking, why are we talking about Nurses Week? Well, 2 reasons. Number 1, so many of you know the value of celebrating milestones. So I hope you will help me spread the word that there is this really powerful, done for you Nurses Week celebration. It's got the education with an amazing speaking colleague of mine, Stephanie Staples, a rewired nurse, resiliency expert. We've joined forces. I'm a recognition expert. We're going to make sure nurses feel valued, supported, and have so many tools to feel more resourceful in this challenging time. So please spread the word. The other reason I want to mention it is that this doesn't have to be just for nurses. All of your security professionals and the other departments you work with, why not make this one huge connective experience? Hospitals and facilities across North America, perhaps even across the world, could all benefit from a boost of resiliency. Would you not agree? And if we do it together, and if we take some of the burden off of you as busy leaders, I think we can make this happen really quickly. What do you think? I hope you will check it out. Visit us, learn more about what we're trying to do. Please spread the word. And if nothing else, just remember, Nurses Week is coming up, or the first part of May, varies a little bit country to country. Just please make sure you reach out to as many nurses as possible and say thank you. I appreciate you being on my team.
Be sure to subscribe to the Healthcare Security Cast so you don't miss a single episode. We're on multiple platforms including Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and Audible, just about anywhere where you can listen to a podcast. For links to all of these sites, for links to join the Healthcare Security Cast community groups on LinkedIn and Facebook, or if you're interested in being a guest or being a sponsor, you can find all of this through one link. Check out our Linktree at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. And before we get into the show, I just want to thank our sponsors, 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit 3dnetworktechnology.com. And Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com. And also the Change Execution Group and 360 Life Transformations. Visit 360lifetransformations.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast. I'm joined today by Kwesi Millington. Kwesi, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. I always like to start off by learning about the guest. So I'm going to ask you the loaded question. Who is Kwesi Millington?
I am a former RCMP police officer, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now I am a youth and first responder motivational speaker. I speak on resilience. I help youth with becoming what I call unbreakable, building unshakable core. And also I work with first responders and people in basically high stress jobs working on helping them build resilience. I'm an author and I'm a coach as well.
Awesome stuff. Now, yeah, you kind of summed it up there. You're author, speaker, coach, and all the work that you're doing with the youth and first responders. What is it that led to you doing the work that you're doing today?
Basically the short story is that I was with the RCMP and I was charged with a crime I didn't commit. Through that process, I ended up being charged, being convicted of something I didn't do, went to prison, unfortunately, for that. And I lost my career. Through that process, I was able to kind of learn about how to be resilient, how to bounce back when things go pretty crappily in your life, for lack of a better word. And now I just try to help, number one, first responders, my former community, high stress organizations, and also now youth as well. Try to help them build resilience and mental health.
All right. Now you touched on the obviously a significant occurrence that led to you being falsely incarcerated. And obviously, this was in Canada, this was a very high profile case. Would you mind sharing your insights as to what happened? Well, your perspective as one of the four responding officers to that incident.
Yeah, exactly. So if for those who don't know the story, back in 2007, I was called to the airport, Vancouver International Airport, with three other officers. But we were responding to a man who had broken airport property and was basically had destroyed airport property and was yelling and shouting all these things that were going on. When we got up there, we attempted to communicate with him, and that wasn't happening. We ended up getting into a physical altercation with him, got into a fight with him. I tased him. We got in a struggle on the floor after his arrest. Unfortunately, he died of heart failure. That was tragic, yes. 3 separate police forces cleared us of any wrongdoing. They said that we did what we were trained to do. And that's where I thought the story would end. And what happened was we had to testify at a national inquiry as to what happened. Based on that testimony, we were charged with perjury. So basically, we had given statements. We testified as to what was in those statements. The incident was video recorded, and anyone who's in the first responder community knows that when you take notes, you don't get everything perfectly right, especially after a traumatic incident. I didn't get everything right, but I did the best I could. I knew it was being recorded. It was in a public airport. And I said that any mistakes that I made were accidental. They were called deliberate. I was charged with perjury, which means lying under oath. I never lied a day in my career, but I was charged, convicted, sent to jail, lost my career. All that happened over a span of 10 years. That's how the system goes. From the incident, the night of the incident, to testifying at the inquiry, to being charged, to a court case that took almost 2 years, to waiting for an appeal process, to finally losing that and going to jail. That was a 10-year process. So I guess through that process of waiting and, the ups and downs, that's kind of where I learned how to kind of bounce back from things. And it wasn't immediate. I was diagnosed with PTSD and depression from what I had gone through. And I know it sounds kind of weird that someone died, but I went through trauma. But the trauma is from doing your job to the best of your ability, being told you did your job right, but still being punished for it externally by, a court system that decided that I was guilty of perjury, right? So, but now I'm just trying to give something back to the community where I came from, and also youth as well. So community, I mean, first responders, but anyone who's going through high stress, and then work on helping them build resilience now. So I'm moving past that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I want to ask just one more question about the case, and then we'll move on and talk about the resilience and what this experience taught you. But obviously, yourself and the other 3 officers, you guys were kind of painted in the media as 4 bad apples who lied to cover their tracks. One of the reporters who covered the story, he went on to write a book about it as well, and really gave the other side. What about the narrative was contradictory to what actually occurred?
Yeah, like you said, the narrative was painted, and I mean, it's painted even more so now in that way. Back then, there weren't as many police recorded incidents as there are now, but it was painted that the officers went in to hurt a poor immigrant that was flying in and was just confused and lost, and basically we bullied him and used excessive force and murdered him. And that was the kind of narrative that was spun and that we lied about it. All throughout the media, all throughout the court case, the focus, even though the charge was perjury, the focus was always hinting at the fact that, oh, these guys used excessive force and attacked this poor man. I mean, during my perjury trial, they went over and over again through the video, which kind of showed me that that is what they wanted to focus on, even though it wasn't a use of force trial. The undertones were there. So that's the kind of narrative that was there, that we were aggressive, brutal cops that murdered a man. And to this day, I still get, emails and threats and all that kind of stuff online from people who still feel that way.
Right. Well, I know obviously the incarceration itself comes with its own challenges. What was the impact on you directly? Like, what was that experience like?
I mean, by the time I went to jail, fortunately, I'd already been seeing a psychologist for, I don't know, 8 years? So the one thing that she really helped me with was always looking at what I could control. So if I had gone to jail right at the time of the incident back in 2007, or at the inquiry in 2009, I think I would have been mentally in a much worse place. But one of the things that kind of helped me was looking at what I could control. So my psychologist would say that to me, like, what happens if you do go to jail? What are you going to do then? And that question kind of stuck with me. I didn't know how to answer it before going to jail, but I had everyone else around me saying, no, you're going to be, you're going to win your appeal and nothing's going to happen. You're not going to go to jail. You're going to be back working in no time. But the one person who had always said, make sure you look at the other side, was my psychologist. So by the time I got to prison, I mean, it wasn't an easy situation because I had to be in solitary for the first part of my sentence, which was 2.5 years. I ended up serving 10 months in the Canadian correctional system. But the one thing that helped was trying to find things that I could control. And that didn't happen right away. I mean, there was a lot of dark moments sitting in a 7x11 cell for 23.5 hours a day. Now, a lot of my training, I talk about that experience and what I got from that experience that can help people that have never been to jail and never will go to jail. So there were dark times, but I ended up kind of finding resources internally and externally that helped me get through that.
Now, as far as some of those resources that you found and developed in there, I guess what are some of the things that you can share with us that you really learned from just having to deal with that, being in that cell for, like you said, 23.5 hours a day?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I guess the first thing was always trying to come back to the present moment. And that was a big thing for me. I mean, I didn't get that right away. It was probably the first, week in solitary. It was really just a lot of sitting in a corner and just feeling sorry for myself and not wanting to, be around anymore and not wanting to be here anymore. And, having dark thoughts of not wanting to live anymore. Those types of thoughts did come through my head, go through my head. Fortunately, the guards gave me access to the prison library, which I can say probably saved me, because I ended up finding a lot of books in there and I just kind of dove into reading. And I found some self-help books and I just started reading probably a book every day or two. And one of the books was a book by Eckhart Tolle called A New Earth. And as I read it, I realized he started to harp on being present. And I don't want to say meditation, but just coming back to the moment, coming back to the present moment and asking yourself, what can I do right now? And it sounds very simple, but up until that point, I've been just thinking about the past. Why did this happen to me? And thinking about the future, what's going to happen? Because in the beginning of my sentence, I didn't know how long I was going to be in there. I had to wait to speak to my parole officer, who told me I was only going to have to serve a third of the sentence, which is 10 months. But up until, in that first couple of weeks, I didn't know. So I'd been thinking about, okay, how am I going to do 2.5 years in here? And, all these things. But that was probably one of the main things that helped, just building a meditation practice pretty much right after the first week in jail.
Now, I'm sure too, eventually you were out of solitary and you had to interact with the other inmates. Now, being on the other side of the correction system for so long, what was that whole process like? Like interacting with the inmates, yeah, I'm just curious, is going from a serving RCMP officer to interacting with the inmates. What were there any lessons in that experience?
Absolutely. When it comes to being on I guess, the minimum security side of the prison, that's where I ended up. I ended up going from solitary to minimum security. And fortunately, I was in a unit where nobody wanted to know what anybody else was in for because they were in for some crappy things. So that was a good part of it. One of the main lessons I learned was that it's not good to be judgmental. So I ended up judging a lot of the guys that were in there. You think, okay, well, I used to be a cop. I'm the innocent one. You guys are criminals. You guys should be here. And creating that kind of mental wedge. And one of the things I did was I became a tutor. They have a school in the prison, and I became a tutor, an English tutor, and helped some of the guys write their parole board letters, write papers to help them graduate with a high school diploma. And through that process, I ended up learning some of their stories, and it ended up kind of changing my view of them. So I'd look at them, and instead of just judging them, I realized that yes, there are bad people in prison, but a lot of them are just good people who made a mistake. So that was probably one of the main lessons that came to mind right when you asked that question was don't judge anyone, which it says it in the Bible, the golden rule, everybody knows it, but nobody applies it, right? So that was something I had to learn, not to be judgmental. And I wasn't really a judgmental person before, but it made me realize that yes, I kind of had been a bit judgmental and I need to change that.
All right. And it's funny, when I was preparing for this, I read a couple of some blog posts, and I seen that there was even there's something, you learn a valuable lesson too, talking to somebody of all things about fentanyl.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which post was that? Oh yes, that was just about getting people's story and understanding why people do things. And the post you're referring to is a lot of times people would say, okay, how can you do a certain drug? And my wife would ask me, because fentanyl is a drug that's so dangerous, it's like, X times more potent than heroin. I forgot the exact number. And it's very dangerous. So you automatically assume no one would take this drug deliberately. And so I was talking to a guy actually in prison, and I said to him, okay, well, why do people take fentanyl deliberately if they know it has such a high mortality rate and it's such a dangerous drug? And he said, that's what draws people in. And it's sick. It sounds sick, but the fact that it could kill you means that if it doesn't, it must provide some amazing high. And that's what I wrote about in the article. And it wasn't a matter of, okay, trying to encourage anyone to take fentanyl. Of course not. It was about making sure you talk to people to understand their full story, even if it makes no sense to you initially. And that's what I learned from him. It makes no sense to me why someone would take fentanyl, and I still would never take fentanyl, but at the same time, he helps me understand why people do things. And I think that that's an important thing for us to take away, like in all situations, especially now with race relations. We need to understand all sides of an issue and talk to people to get the full story and not assume we understand.
No, absolutely. And that's one thing that comes up consistently when I'm having these conversations is the whole piece about empathy and trying to put yourself in another person's shoes. And, you really kind of spoke to that there. The other thing that you mentioned too was race relations, and, how that's a prominent issue now. Looking at this case, there was four officers involved. I know yourself and another officer. So, yourself being a person of color, the other officer being an Aboriginal, were both incarcerated, and there was two officers involved that were acquitted, and they were, that both of those officers were white. Now, was there ever at any time that you thought about this, and especially when you had all the time in the world to just think about these things, did you ever think that race may have been a part of why you ended up in prison and the other officers didn't?
Yeah, I do get that question a lot because, like you said, I mean, the optics are there, and you can't ignore the fact that, yes, like you said, there are four of us charged with the same crime. We were at the same call. Two white officers were acquitted. Two officers of color were convicted. Was there racism in the actual justice system? I mean, it appears so. I don't harp on that because right now there's a lot of pushback towards the actual systemic racism in police forces. And a lot of people, especially my Black friends, will say to me, yes, systemic racism in policing is why you were convicted. And I have a good friend. One of my good friends is one of the white officers that was acquitted. And he went through hell before he was acquitted. So he was, if people want to say the force treated you this way or they didn't step up and do this for you, you could make the same argument for the two white officers, right? So up until the point of them being acquitted, we all went through the same thing. So I would not point to systemic racism within the force because the four of us went through the same thing up until the point of Judgment Day. Was there race? Did race play a factor within my individual trial and within, Robinson's individual trial? I mean, that is something I'd be more open to believing, but I can't prove anything, so I don't harp on what I can't prove or what I can't, substantiate, right? So I don't harp on that anymore.
Right, and the thing that you point out there that's interesting, that's important to note as well, is that all of you had your own separate trials. It's not like the four of you were tried together. You all had different judges, and that's obviously going to affect the outcomes as well.
Yeah, exactly. We had different judges, and every judge, I don't know their motivation. And so by the time it went to the court system, long before I was convicted, it was kind of out of the RCMP's hands. So how can I say that force led to me being incarcerated? It just doesn't make sense.
Right now. So there's a couple of things there just from that whole experience. Number one, obviously we touched on the empathy thing. It's important to understand people's perspectives. Number two, you talk about your training, you followed your training, you did what you were supposed to do in that situation, and it still went south now. And that's another thing that comes up a lot as well in these conversations is you can do all of the right things and still have a bad outcome. And sometimes, in healthcare and in law enforcement, there's not really a good option. You have to try to really make the least bad decision in a lot of these cases and kind of hope things work out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's almost a cliche that you do everything right and things still go wrong. In the first responder industry, it happens more than in any other industry. The unfortunate part of what's going on now is that we go through training and we understand when you see a certain behavior, you do this, and the public doesn't understand that. But we have a lot of armchair quarterbacks in the public that have decided that they know what something means, right? So they know that when I went to the airport, I shouldn't have used my taser, or I should have done this, or should have done that. And now I look at what's happening now. I almost got treated lightly by the media, in comparison, where now we see in the States, officers are getting physically attacked, and maybe even here too, I don't know. And by people that just hate them. And there's a lot of people out there that have no idea about police training, and they are giving commentary on it. That's like me telling Tom Brady how to play football. You don't do it, right? So if I say I went to the airport, I tried to use verbal communication. His behavior went from non-compliant to resistant to combative, all in a matter of 30 seconds. A first responder kind of understands that lingo. They get that. They understand that. So I use the force response that I was trained to use. The public just sees they went in and they killed a guy and shocked him to death. So there's a lot of people that need to step back and look at and understand they don't understand.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's Thomas Solon. I'm going to kind of paraphrase what he said because I don't remember the exact quote, but basically saying that our intelligence is kind of tied up in us understanding the extent of our own ignorance.
Nice.
Right. Perfect. So, and it's interesting that you say that because I was watching I was watching a video the other day that was talking about one of these incidents, and the commentary, like you said, the person got up and started it off by saying, "I'm not a use of force expert," but then they expounded for the next 20 minutes about how everything the officers did was wrong in this specific case, and it's it really lines up with what you said about it's really armchair quarterbacks who don't have the experience, who a lot of times are putting enough pressure on from standpoint of the media to really affect some of the outcomes, I feel anyways, in some of these cases.
Yeah, exactly, and I don't know what the entire answer is, but I do know I saw an example of the right answer in a book I read called The Courageous Police Leader. I think Travis Yates is, I hope I got his name right. Geez, if I didn't, hopefully, please forgive me. But he's a former police officer down in the States, and he had mentioned a story of an officer in Arizona that who had an incident where it was a police chief and his officers were crucified by the media for something they did, and he actually went on TV, explained frame by frame what happened in the video, why the police used the force they did, and said it was justified, and explained it in a press conference, which I thought was the ultimate encourage, because that almost never happens. So yeah, didn't happen in my case, didn't happen in a lot of cases. And I think that would go a long way, because what you see is, you see a police case, you see something happen, and then you just see anyone but police officers commenting about it on the media. And unless I'm wrong, and police chiefs are coming on and saying, "Hey, listen, this is why the officers did what they did. This is what they were trained to do. Da 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 da. I stand by my officer." If they do it, it needs to be more public, or maybe it's being hidden, or whatever. But I think that would go a long way, because all that the public is getting is the media sensational snippet of something, not the whole story, not the background. And that just could only lead to a police officer or other first responder being vilified.
No, absolutely. Now, the other piece is too, through all of this, obviously it had a huge impact on your life, but the person that you came out of that facility as, you've become someone who's really using your experience to help others. Was there a specific turning point that really made you think, I've got to share this message with people, and I've got to really help people understand how they can be more resilient?
I guess I don't know if there was a real one turning point, but there's a few times when I've read about, number one, police officer suicides, and number two, youth suicides. And that bugs me, because mental health and suicide go hand in hand. And I was diagnosed with PTSD and depression. So I really wanted to really deconstruct and break down what I've done to be resilient. Because if I can prevent anyone from committing suicide by just saying, "Hey, listen, this is one thing you can do that will help you." And I try to do that when I do training. Just, here are the tools that you can use, right? As officers, we have our tool belt. Here's a tool that you can use when you feel a certain way. And so I guess the turning point for me is just seeing that if there is someone that I can help, then I want to be able to do that. And an officer in my own story, in my own case, committed suicide, and he was an RCMP member. It was an officer who had reported on the incident. So what happened was we went to the airport, and we went through that altercation, and a media spokesperson was just thrust into being on the air and saying what happened without getting all the information and talking to us. And he got the facts wrong, because when the video came out, it didn't match up with what he had said. And that's where the whole cover-up story began. And this officer got thrown under the bus when really it shouldn't have gone that way. He should have been more prepared, and he should have been defended for not being prepared. And he took it hard on himself. And I'm just really oversimplifying the story. I say read Kurt Petrovich's book to get the whole full story. But it's very tragic. He ended up committing suicide over everything that happened. And if I can prevent something like that happening by helping officers build resilience, first responders build resilience, youth build resilience, then I've done my part.
Yeah, no, that's it's always tough. And now for someone like myself who, I don't have a deep understanding of PTSD. What could you what could you do to kind of simplify it for me, or really kind of share what exactly PTSD, the effect that it has on on an individual?
Well, that's a layered question and I will say I'm not an expert in PTSD because there are levels to it, and I know that there are people who have much worse levels than what I've experienced. But I would say that when you are having flashbacks of an incident, when you are having reminders of an incident, when certain places trigger you, get checked out because you don't know what it is, what it could be. So I can't say to you in one phrase what PTSD is because it's different for a lot of people. It's different for everyone who's experienced it. But the best thing I can say is if you feel any kind of, if you just don't feel yourself and you don't know what to, how to analyze yourself, go to a professional and have them talk you through it, because it took me a while for me to actually realize that that's what it was, and go to a clinic and get it diagnosed. Because I don't know about other people, but I'm a kind of a perfectionist, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm okay. I can deal with it. I can get through it. I'll push through it. Whatever. It's just a bad day. And when the bad days kind of multiply and they add up, it's time to talk to someone who can tell you what it is really. And knowing what it is allows you to see how you can treat it. Right. So my best advice is see a professional if you don't feel yourself, and then they can tell you what it is and diagnose it way better than I can.
No, fair enough. Now, you talk about coming from the coming out of this experience and being able to now share the tools with people to help them navigate these challenges. What are some of the recommendations that you make? Like, what are some of the tools that you speak of?
Well, the one that I mentioned already is just having some kind of presence practice. So I've kind of changed it. I used to teach it as, okay, you have 5 minutes of silence every day, and just as a nice starting point. And I do recommend that because I do that myself. I do more than that now, but have a time of the day when you just set a timer on your watch and just take some deep breaths and come back to the moment. And what that does, it's not about, sitting in meditation in the mornings or anything like that. It brings that practice into your life so you can bring more presence into other times of your life, because the the ability to come back and return to being present doesn't help you the most when you're sitting quietly at home. It helps you when you're being overwhelmed, when you're being stressed out, when you're talking to someone and you're feeling like you're being triggered or whatever else. When you start to head into that panic mode or areas where you don't feel mentally or emotionally strong, that's when the practice that you had been doing will help you. I'll literally be a little bit stressed out or just feeling overwhelmed, and I'll sit down, I'll take 5 deep breaths. And that's why the morning practice helps, not for the morning, but for the times when I'm stressed out. That's one thing. One of the big things I tell people is focus on what you can control, because a lot of times we try to control so much, and the A-type personality that first responders have of trying to, control everything is just detrimental. So focus on the little things you can control, especially now we're in this pandemic. A lot of people don't know, okay, when's the vaccine coming out? When's everything returning to normal? Every single day, what's within your control? That will bring you so much calm. And another thing is you watch your social surroundings, like who's around you. And I say that make sure that's not all from the same industry. So I was transplanted from Toronto to BC. I had all police officer friends, and I thought that was cool at the time, but it kind of jaded me to the rest of the world, and I needed to diversify and connect with my old friend group again so that I have friends that I don't talk about policing with. And that is just totally separate from that world, because you can get immersed in that world, and then if that's all you know 24/7 and then it's taken away, it feels like you lost your life because it's everything that you know. So the diversified social circle, that's just a few of the tools. I mean, there's a ton that I've come to learn over the years, but those are three that I would say really help a lot of people.
Yeah, no, that's an important point too, is the people that you surround yourself with. I think it was Jim Rohn who said you are the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So it kind of goes hand in hand with what you're saying as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now, so you have the book, you're doing the public speaking. What are some of the things that we can look forward to seeing from you in the future?
Just there come a few different organizations, both in Canada and the States, because now we're virtual, I can do it online. I'll be doing some training for some organizations down in the States, and also schools here. I'm speaking to high schools is my demographic for youth. So I'm doing that here, and I'm actually reaching out to the States as well for schools. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Just a lot of just speaking, and then some training for a few organizations. And I have a 19-month-old son, so spending time with my family and raising him.
Awesome stuff. Now, I'm going to kind of swing back and ask you a question. And you may have already hit on this throughout this discussion, and it's kind of a challenging question. But if you could, I'll kind of put it one of two ways, and you can kind of you can decide which way you want to go with it. Now, looking at somebody who's just starting their career in policing, or if you went back to when you were starting your career before you, like you said, you got transplanted from Toronto to BC. If you could go back to that time, knowing what you know now, and give yourself some advice, or give some advice to that person who's really starting on that same journey, what would be the most important advice that you would share with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. If someone was starting out, I guess the most important advice I would give them is always return to why you're doing your job, why you're doing what you do, because that will help you get through the tough times, right? So if you're working in a position and you don't get along with your supervisor, or you're getting a little jaded, return to why you became a first responder in the first place, or why you start to do whatever you're doing, because that will help you focus on and stay motivated when things around you aren't working out. And that why will also be a reason that will also drive you in other areas of your life. So when you're outside of work and you have hobbies, which you should maintain hobbies outside of the work that you do. Don't just make it all about your job. Wrap that why into that as well. So for instance, my why was helping people. And it sounds kind of cliche in the first responder world, but how it helped me is that when I was discharged from the RCMP, I was able to say, okay, my why is still helping people. And it helped me to separate from that sense of loss of losing my job. I can still help people doing something else. So because I crystallized that why and went back to it, I was able to do other things that helped me feel like I was still contributing, still doing something outside of policing that gave me some kind of purpose. So I would say that is a big thing. Always know your why.
Awesome. Now, the one thing that I almost failed to ask you about was the podcast. Can you talk to us about the podcast and how that's going?
Yeah, no, not a problem. So I started a podcast based on resilience. And so what I try to do is twofold. Number one, I want to interview people who have had stories of resilience, because studies show that when you hear stories of resilience, you actually become more resilient. So if you feel like you need a shot of resilience, go read a story about someone who's resilient. And the closer it is to whatever you're going through, the better. But just read stories of people who've overcome and the tools they've used. There's a ton of them out there. So I want to provide that in podcast form. So I'm going to interview people who have gone through things. And I've interviewed quite a few people already, from, sexual assault survivors and, violence survivors, people who have been to jail, a lot of different people and their stories of resilience. So I want that to be out there, so that if you do need a place to go and listen to stories of resilience, that can be that. The second type of person I want to interview is the experts on resilience. I have a doctor coming on next month, so I can learn even more. So when I go out and do my training, I'm even more equipped to help people when it comes to resilience. So I have that's the second type of person I'm interviewing on my podcast. So resilience survivors and people who are way smarter than me.
That's awesome stuff. And yeah, you're really living a life of service. Now, that kind of actually leads me to my next question. And I'm, for my community, the Healthcare Security Cast community, another group that is focused on service as well. Is there a special message you'd like to share with this group, especially in the midst of this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, the group, my first responder groups and your healthcare community, first of all, thank you for what you do and putting yourself out there every day. Even before this, it's a tough go, and now it's even more so. So I just want you to know you're appreciated by people. Even though I went through something bad, I'm not a person who's jaded about the first responder community. I know your value and your worth, and I appreciate you.
Awesome stuff. And as we wrap up, what are the best ways to connect with you?
Yeah, if you want to connect with me, KwesiMillington.com is my first responder site. If you want to bring me in to speak to a high school, it's KwesiSpeaks.com. So I have two websites for my two groups that I speak to.
Awesome stuff. Thank you very much, Kwesi. Thank you for being open and being candid and just really sharing your story with us.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our Linktree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, BRINE, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.